Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome all of you here. My name is Gary Bahina. I'm president of the Friends of the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard Museum. Beautiful day outside. Everybody had a lot of choices with all the things that are going on downtown. We got the Seawall Festival, Farmers Market, the cars, the flea market, everything else that's going on. Glad you joined us. We're here for our second in our four-part series on 250 years of the United States Navy. Today is 250 years of the United States Marine Corps. Our speaker is going to be Dr. Shawn Callahan. He will be introduced by General Michael McWilliams. I'll introduce General McWilliams in a couple of seconds. I want to get a quick plug in for our next two events. October 11th, 250 years of Navy medicine, and November 1st, 250 years of service to the Navy on the Norfolk Naval Shipyard. I hope you'll put those in your calendars. You'll get lots of nagging emails from me about them, so I know you won't be able to forget. One last thing before I introduce General McWilliams. I want to thank Aaron Cohen and Greg Godberry today. And the city of Portsmouth. This is a first for us. We're live streaming this event. So we didn't tell you about it because we were afraid you'd stay home, sit up on the sofa or your lounger with your beer and not show up. But we are live streaming on the city's YouTube page. The Marine Corps, I guess Quantico, had put out information about this, so their subscribers are able to watch this today from home. So this will be a first test run, and we're very grateful to everybody especially the city, for doing this for us. So without further, as always, we want to welcome our special guests, which as always is Admiral Councilman Mark Hugel. Mark, thank you. Some of you recognize him from last night playing drums for the Tumbleweed Brothers in one of his many city gigs. And without any further ado, I want to introduce Brigadier General Michael E. McWilliams, who will be introducing our speaker, Dr. Shawn Callahan. General McWilliams is Commander, Joint Enabling Capabilities Command, United States Transportation Command, Naval Station Norfolk. General McWilliams leads the Joint Planning Support Element located at the Norfolk Naval Station and the Joint Communications Support Element located at MacDill. The JECC supports the stand-up of the Joint Task Force headquarters in response to crises worldwide. The JEC provides planners, public affairs specialists, and communications capabilities to combat commanders in order to enable the rapid establishment of the Joint Task Force headquarters whenever they needed. As I came up with my little thing on it, looking at what you do, they take the chaos out of joint. General McWilliams was commissioned as an infantry officer in 1994 and subsequently transitioned into operations plans and logistics. His significant awards are many, but they include multiple awards of the Legion of Merit for exceptionally meritorious conduct and performance of outstanding services and achievements, and an award of the Bronze Star. Also significant, at least to me, as I teased the general a little bit earlier, go Terriers. General McWilliams received an MBA from Boston University, my alma mater. And in addition, and of significance to Portsmouth, thank you, Mark, for letting me know this tie, and its ties to the shipyard. General McWilliams served as Congressional Fellow to Congressman Norman Sosiski, a name that some of you will recognize. I see some applause already starting. As Mark reminded me about Congressman Sosiski, back in the day, the shipyard was in Congressman Sosiski's district. And the shipyarders always knew that they could count on the congressman to take care of the yard through Brax in the 90s and beyond. He was great at getting military construction money for the shipyard, including to build Building 1500, which is the HQ building where the shipyard commander's office is and where much of the shipyard nuclear engineering admin functions are housed. When Congressman Sosiski passed in March of 2001, which happened to be during Mark's command tour, Building 1500 was renamed for him. So in connection with our introducer. And on that, just one last thing. When we do our QA today, Keith will be on this side of the room. I'll be on this side with a microphone. We're asking you to please not start your question until you have a microphone in front of you so that it's picked up on the city's live stream. All right? We'll remind you again before we get to QA, but just give you a heads up. So with that, Joan McWilliams, turn it over to you.
Hey, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And before I introduce our guest speaker, I wasn't really going to talk about my relationship with the area and my time with Representative Norman Sosiski, but I will tell you that it was 25 years ago that I was a congressional fellow for Mr. Sosiski, and my first real exposure to the Hampton Roads area and coming down here with him to visit all the men and women that serve really the naval shipyard building and execution business. And what an honor it was. I actually, at the time, the Ronald Reagan was almost complete, and I got to go over and we got to walk the Reagan. It was probably 3/4 of the way complete. And just watching what the men and women from this area do to be able to build a ship like that was one of the most amazing things I've done. Matter of fact, when I was getting my MBA, I had an operations management class, and our simple operation management was really focused on Titleist and how to build a golf ball. And when I went to go see the operations management that's required to build an aircraft carrier, I was absolutely in awe. So that was my first exposure. And you brought up a flood of memories of my time with Mr. Sosiski, and what a great man, as all of you who may know him know. But that's not why we're here. So ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Again, my name is Brigadier General McWilliams, and as the commander of the Joint Enabling Capabilities Command and a Marine, it's always a privilege to stand in front of an audience like this that's dedicated to preserving the fabric of our maritime heritage. So welcome and thank you and welcome to the Friends of Portsmouth Naval Shipyard Museum speaking series. Today, we have a guest who, in my estimation, exemplifies what it means to be a Marine, to be a warrior scholar, and who understands the importance from our about our history and how that prepares us for the challenge of the future. So Dr. Shawn Callahan, who is the Director of Marine Corps History, he's a brother in arms. He's a 1992 graduate of the United States Naval Academy and served 22 years as an F-18 Delta weapons officer. And he's deployed around the world supporting major operations in Europe, the Middle East, and the Asian Pacific. So he knows what it's like to be at the pointy end of the spear. And he understands from his experiences as a Marine and deploying around the world, what history can do for us as we look forward. So Dr. Callahan is just not a warrior. He's a thinker. He's a scholar. He's a historian. He holds a master's degree from George Washington University, and he holds a PhD from the University of Maryland, where his research was on the Marine Corps doctrine and how it supports the enduring legacy of maneuver warfare. So he understands the why behind the what when it comes to Marine Corps history. And so beyond his academic achievements, he's really dedicated himself to future generations of Marines, naval, and joint officers. He's taught at the United States Naval Academy, the Marine Corps Command and Staff College, and most recently he was a director of the Marine Corps Distance Education Program. So dedicated to shaping the minds of young men and women to impact our future. So since his current assignment as a director of, assuming his current assignment as a director of Marine Corps History in 2024, Dr. Callahan is charged with ensuring the Marine Corps never forgets the past, and then we can learn from both our successes and failures as we help shape the future. So ladies and gentlemen, if you could give me a warm welcome and a round of applause for our guest speaker today, Dr. Shawn Callahan.
Thank you, General, for those very kind words. I feel a little bit better about myself having heard somebody say such things, so thank you, really. I want to also thank the City of Portsmouth and the Friends of the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard Museum for inviting me to be here today. It is truly an honor. I will say also I appreciate the chance to talk about history. As the Director of Marine Corps History Division right now, I spend much more time doing management tasks than I do practicing the trade of being a historian. So this presented me a great opportunity to tell you a story that's been told many times before, but in a different way that I hope will have some meaning to you as folks who already have a acute interest in naval affairs. So if you came here for 250 years of battle history and learning about the glory of the United States Marine Corps, I can do that during the Q&A or one-on-one afterwards, but this is a story that I'm trying to tell specifically for this audience. Most people's familiarity with the United States Marine Corps is the result of a carefully cultivated public image, one that communicates its brand as an elite organization distinguished by its selectivity, ethos, and military prowess. Much of the American public has only a vague sense, at best, that the Marine Corps has an association with the U.S. Navy. Of course, this audience, with a keen interest in naval history, is well aware of the relationship between America's two naval services. My objective today is to explore the long relationship between the U.S. Navy and Marine Corps over their 250 years. While this will not dispute the basic elite public image of the Marine Corps, and I will still celebrate the many achievements of our Corps in this important 250th anniversary year, I aim to convey a deeper understanding of how the Marine Corps' relationship with the Navy over its long history has defined the Corps and the way Marines think of themselves. At times, this was a very cooperative relationship, usually because it was clear that one organization could not accomplish its mission without the other. At other times, it was a more complicated relationship. But today, the Navy and Marine Corps team remain a strong partnership as a result of their long shared history. This story must begin with the establishment of the Continental Navy and Continental Marines in the fall of 1775, for the origins of these two organizations 250 years ago are indeed intertwined. As first authorized in October 1775, the American Navy was a bold and hopeful venture. The Continental Marines, created as an adjunct force of this fledgling Navy, was an equally aspirational project. Today, Marines celebrate the resolution of the Continental Congress in Philadelphia on November 10, 1775, to establish 2 battalions of American Marines as the birth of our Corps. But those 2 battalions were never raised. Philadelphia did serve as a focal area for recruiting, but most Marines were recruited directly into the crews of the ships of the Continental Navy, as shown by this recruiting advertisement. This was placed by Continental Marine Captain William Jones of the ship Providence, seeking immediately a few good men to make up her complement. And I'm sure that many of you will recognize that this phrase, a few good men, is the same one resurrected in 1970 as the central recruiting slogan of a very different and more modern Corps. Marines were organized to serve a threefold role aboard the ships of the American Navy, and the inspiration for this was clearly the way the Royal Marines served within the Royal Navy. First, they served as the ship's guard force, providing security and preventing mutinies. In battle, Marines provided small arms fire from the fighting tops up in the rigging and participated in boarding parties. On occasion, when operations ashore were required, Marines participated in these as well, but almost always in landing parties which contained large percentages of sailors, as seen here. In the first 2 years of their service in the Continental Navy, the American Marines served in all of these roles, but by the end of 1777, the situation was very different. With a fuller weight of the British Army and Royal Navy applied in North America, much of the Continental Navy was captured or destroyed, and General Washington was on the defensive around Philadelphia. In view of this exigency, Major Samuel Nicholas combined the Marines he had on hand in Philadelphia into a small battalion and participated in Washington's winter campaign, overwintering in Morristown. Thus, it will be shown that when called upon, Marines were prepared to serve in sustained operations ashore, far from the Navy they were really meant to be an integral part of. The Continental Navy, and along with it the Continental Marines, ceased to exist after the end of the war with Britain. At that moment, in 1783, when the frigate Alliance was laid up and the very last sailor and the very last Marine went ashore. Over the ensuing 15 years, there was a debate about the need for a standing Navy. This idea that Marines were a necessary part of any American Navy continued as demonstrated by an act to provide a naval armament, which in 1794 authorized the construction of 6 frigates and the recruitment of crews for those vessels, including specifications for Marines for each frigate. Though the construction of these ships was suspended, a looming naval war with France in 1798 led to a renewal of these efforts, and when the next Marines were recruited, it was by Navy authorities specifically to serve aboard these ships. Here we see the original commission of Franklin Wharton, who just 6 years later would become the Commandant of the Marine Corps. But in 1798, he was appointed a Lieutenant of Marines in the Navy of the United States to serve aboard a specific vessel. This condition of Marines simply being a type of service member in the Navy did not last long, however, as someone, and it's not clear who, saw a need for a distinct organization to provide and train Marines for this type of duty. Congress passed the Act for Establishing and Organizing a Marine Corps on July 11th, 1798, and this is the true birthday of the U.S. Marine Corps. While this firmly established the Corps in law, the Major Commandant was not even authorized a staff to include such key Marines as an adjutant, a paymaster, or a quartermaster, unless the Marine Corps or any part of it shall be ordered by the President to do duty on shore. This firmly established the Marine Corps as a part of the naval establishment, but kept the door open to other duties and a more robust role in time. The primary and usually singular role of the U.S. Marine Corps over the next century remained to provide Marines to serve aboard the ships of the U.S. Navy and to garrison the Marine barracks, which provided security for Navy yards. While integral to a ship's crew, shipboard Marines were organized into what was known as each vessel's Marine Guard, its guard force under the command of a Marine officer, and in the case of smaller vessels, a senior sergeant known as the orderly sergeant. The Marines of a ship's guard were a force for order, charged with preserving discipline, but otherwise offering no direct value in contributing to the operation of the vessel. Wearing distinct uniforms and having separate roles, they essentially constituted an other within, but there was no real sense that these men were of higher quality than the sailors. Indeed, in daily life, with Marines posted as sentries, but otherwise having no duties related to the maintenance or operation of the ship, many sailors considered their Marine shipmates to be lazy freeloaders. Their relative value had also been made clear in policy from the start, for since the American Revolution, Marine privates were the lowest paid members of the crew, and their sergeants earned only as much as an ordinary seaman. There were some very rare occasions when Marines did undertake some independent activities from the Navy. One such example is the expedition to Tripoli by Lieutenant Presley O'Bannon and a small squad of Marines in 1805. This overland journey and subsequent attack on Derna was a modest venture, especially when it was cut short by a political deal halfway to the final objective. To the Marines of the 19th century, however, this expedition was symbolically very important. It was one of the rare events they could point to as a specifically Marine Corps accomplishment. And we know the Navy was involved too, so to say it was specifically a Marine Corps accomplishment might also be an overstatement. But they commemorated it by having To the Shores of Tripoli emblazoned on the Marine colors and later including it in the opening lines of the Marines hymn. Over time and with experience, more friction points emerged in the relationship between Marines and sailors, often relating to the original idea that Marines should be able to serve to advantage at sea. While this was questioned by many sailors, it was not disputed by Captain David Porter during his famous commerce raiding cruise of the Pacific in the War of 1812. Porter actually gave command of 2 different captured prize vessels to a Marine lieutenant named John Gamble. But this was taken as an affront by some Navy officers, who argued that any Marine officer aboard a ship was subordinate to the most junior Navy officer. There was little but custom to guide such matters until Congress passed, in 1834, an Act for the Better Organization of the United States Marine Corps. This act established that Marine officers would rank equally among those of the other services, but it also prohibited Marine officers from commanding ships or Navy yards, more clearly establishing the functionally subordinate role of Marines aboard ships. Now, this act was more than a solve to the affronted sensibilities of Navy officers. It was actually a major accomplishment for Commandant of the Marine Corps, Colonel Archibald Henderson, who served in that role for 39 years. You'll notice here I pointed out he served over a time under 11 different presidents and 17 different secretaries of the Navy. And this long tenure provided enormous leadership stability to the Corps and enabled him to take a longer view on how the Marine Corps fit into national defense and to develop a strategy to promote it. He realized that while there was a clear justification for the United States to maintain an Army and a Navy of some sort, the case was not nearly as clear for the Marine Corps. It's easy for us today to underappreciate how vulnerable the Corps was. Today, we think of the Marine Corps as one of 5 co-equal armed forces, but that is largely a result of the National Security Act of 1947. For the preceding 169 years, the situation was very different. There was a War Department with an Army, and a Navy Department with a Navy, and also a small Corps of Marines somewhere in between that looked and sometimes acted like a small army that wanted to be part of the Navy. So the danger of this situation became starkly clear in 1827 when, as a cost-saving measure, President Andrew Jackson directed that the Marine Corps be absorbed into the Army. The 1834 law staved this off by requiring the Marine Corps shall at all times be subject to and under the laws and regulations which are or may hereafter be established for the better government of the Navy, except when detached for service with the Army by order of the President of the United States. The law therefore provided a degree of protection by establishing that the Marine Corps is a permanent part of the Department of the Navy, but had a place operating in support of both the Navy and the Army on different occasions, and clarifying the authorities under which it would do so. So with the security the Act of 1834 offered, Henderson was able to more aggressively pursue opportunities for the Corps to demonstrate its value by doing things beyond providing Marine guards for ships and barracks for Navy yards. In 1836, Henderson formed half the strength of the Corps into a 2-battalion regiment, took personal command of it in the field, and then provided for service under Army leadership in the Creek and Seminole Wars. And in the Mexican War, Henderson again scoured the Navy yards to build a battalion, which was eventually employed by General Winfield Scott in Mexico City. So if you look at this map, you see the blue lines on either coast. The Navy played a very important, but a less glorious supporting role in this, and the Marines of those squadrons contributed to that effort. But the Marines were involved in that little call-out box in the lower left-hand corner that went all the way to Mexico City and affected regime change, essentially. So the Marines took great pride in the former, but not in the latter, the more glorious part, being part of the Army's deep inland expedition. And they commemorated it by adding to the halls of the Montezumas to their colors, and later, of course, to the Marines' hymn as well. So this occasional technique of forming battalions for special missions was also done for naval operations on rare occasion. In the Civil War, a battalion was formed to provide the North Atlantic Blockading Squadron with an expeditionary force to seize fleet bases along the Confederate coast. And in 1885, a Marine battalion was formed to help a naval task force stabilize the Isthmus of Panama. It is important to remember, though, how exceptional and fleeting such events were. For its first 123 years, the Marine Corps was almost exclusively focused on sourcing and supporting a collection of platoon-sized guard forces for the vessels and yards of the Navy. On only 7 occasions in this first 123 years of the Corps' history were battalion-sized organizations deliberately formed. But these were temporary units for special purposes which never lasted much longer than a year. The overwhelming majority of Marine experience then was one of serving aboard a ship in a small unit under the command of a young officer or non-commissioned officer. And when Marines did participate in landing operations or expeditions, it was almost always an ad hoc affair of the fleet, which involved large numbers of sailors and under the command of a senior Navy officer. I have here an illustration, I think it was from Harper's Weekly, that shows an attack on Fort Fisher, North Carolina in 1865. The sailors are assaulting the fort with cutlasses, and the order stated, as if in boarding. The Marines on the far right with the rifles were ordered to occupy a supporting position and provide covering fire. This was a disaster that harmed Navy-Marine Corps relations for a long time. But I'll continue with the story. The U.S. Navy evolved in a period of rapid technological advancement over the late 19th century. The composition of ships' crews evolved along with it, and the role of Marines came into question. By the 1880s, it was becoming increasingly clear that the future of naval power lay in steam-driven ships armed with powerful long-range guns. Now, ships outfitted with such technology required a slightly different, more technical breed of sailor. Simultaneously, the growing and expanding population of the United States was providing opportunities to recruit citizen sailors rather than depending so heavily on the multinational pool of experienced seamen which flowed through the port cities with the ebb and flood of the trade. Collectively, these changes meant that the average seaman over time had greater national loyalty to the United States and its officers, was more malleable to acculturation through naval training, and was more technically skilled. A coterie of younger, reform-minded Navy officers began to question the need for Marines in ships' crews, highlighting that there was no longer a danger of mutinies, and the presence of Marines aboard a ship both limited the number of sailors and was an affront to the loyalty of those sailors. Marines over the preceding decades had also experienced a blurring of roles for battle stations. When Navy recruiting was unable to keep up with the massive expansion of the fleet for Civil War blockade duty, Marines were sometimes called to form crews to operate the great guns. Witness, for example, this famous depiction of Admiral Farragut's attack into Mobile Bay, which includes an all-Marine gun crew led by an officer of Marines. As the distances involved in naval battles with rifled cannons increased and small arms seemed increasingly irrelevant to naval warfare, this new role endured. So Marines began routinely manning the secondary batteries of ships, a practice that continued for more than another century. So Marines are now fulfilling more ceremonial roles in the daily operation of a ship and augmenting sailors in the fighting of the ship itself and in landing parties. But with the shipboard roles of Marines being increasingly questioned and the duties of these Marines showing more overlap with those of sailors, the Corps had to make sure its men were proficient in these duties and delivering real value to the vessels in which they served. In 1871, the Marine Corps established a sea school here at Marine Barracks in Portsmouth. Its objective was to ensure every Marine was properly trained in its shipboard duties before being sent aboard from barracks duty. And this system continued for more than a century, with another sea school established in San Diego to support the Pacific Fleet. In 1891, the Corps also opened a School of Application in Philadelphia to train Marine officers, and their training included the use of advanced naval technologies such as mines and torpedoes. Interestingly, however, the idea of Marines operating small caliber weapons from the fighting tops did not disappear for some time, certainly no sooner than the end of the Spanish-American War. In the Battle of Manila Bay, for example, the ship's log of the Olympia recorded that Marines expended several hundred rounds of small arms ammunition in a naval battle that took place at relatively extended range. What was going on there? This painting by John Capolino of the battleship Texas at the Battle of Santiago offers a clue. It clearly depicts, and I've got the call-out box on the right, a Marine officer in the fighting tops directing the fire of a crew of Marines who are operating what appears to be a 1-pound Hotchkiss gun. So with a range of less than 4,000 yards, these guns were adopted to provide anti-torpedo boat defense. Now, there's a lack of Spanish torpedo boats off Santiago for these Marines to be shooting at, but they're not going to miss a chance to be part of the action if there's an enemy cruiser or battleship to take some shots at and gain a share of the credit and earn their stripes. But my larger point here is that the massive technological change occurred in the last half of the 19th century, and this fundamentally changed the expectations of sailors and the way ships were operated and fought. Mutinies and small arms fire between ships were fading into the distant past, but Marines conservatively clung to some traditional roles as part of ships' crews. What would cause the greatest change for the Marine Corps in its relationship with the Navy came from the top down as a result of strategic needs at the turn of this century. In the Spanish-American War, the U.S. Navy found itself challenged to sustain that close blockade of Santiago, Cuba, which was just a short distance from America's own shores. It needed a secure anchorage nearby, which could be used for coaling operations, and Guantanamo Bay was identified as a suitable location. But the fleet could not afford to give up Marines and sailors from its blockade duty to go secure this bay and protect it from counterattack by Spanish forces. A Marine battalion was formed for this purpose, and it succeeded in that mission, benefiting from the Corps' general experience in expeditionary operations, but also the assistance of Cuban insurrectos in the area, and at a critical time, gunfire from supporting naval vessels. This is actually a photograph of Guantanamo Bay, and on that cleared hillside on the right, you can see the actual encampment, which was the Marine base for the defenses. It was known as Camp Nakala after a very favored Navy captain. I believe he was in charge of the Marblehead at this point, but he was very fond of Marines, and they were fond of him. So this operation suggested a new mission for the Marine Corps in an era when coaling stations would be critical to project the reach of the U.S. Navy globally. In 1900, the General Board of the Navy tasked the Marine Corps with a new mission, providing an advanced base force of Marines prepared to land and protect suitable harbors for the U.S. Navy to project its power when needed. Commandant Major General Charles Haywood accepted the mission and established an advanced base force battalion in Philadelphia in 1901. I want to explain this next slide because you'll see it a couple times. On the bottom, I show how many Marines are devoted to the various operational missions over time, and this data is derived from the SecNav reports to Congress every year. And you'll see on the far left there a tiny little green sliver showing that first attempt at an advanced base force. And what it shows us is that the concept did not really get off the ground at first. Immediately, the Marine Corps was called upon to provide forces for counterinsurgency operations in the newly acquired territory of the Philippines, as well as in China. These demands could not be met solely with short-term landing forces drawn from the Asiatic fleet and required the deployment of Marines from the United States. And over the succeeding years, the Corps was also ordered to provide forces for operations in Panama, Cuba, and Nicaragua, sustaining all four interventions simultaneously. As the chart shows, this effectively left no manpower for building an advanced base force unless Marines were taken from their traditional role manning ship's guards. In effect, the Commandant only accepted the advanced base force as an additional mission. And when the small wars demanded attention and forced a choice, ship's guards were the higher priority. This seemed a safe and logical choice since service aboard the ships of the U.S. Navy had been central to the identity and mission of the Marine Corps from the very start. Unfortunately, this conservative decision left the Corps more vulnerable than the Commandant realized. The naval reformers were in a stronger position to advance their agenda when one of their most influential advocates, President Theodore Roosevelt, assumed that position in 1901, or I should say was elected to that position. He supported many of their initiatives to include a robust naval construction program, efforts to improve gunnery, and personnel reforms. And eventually, Roosevelt was persuaded by the reformers' argument that Marines were more of a detriment to a ship's crew than an asset, and they needed to be redirected towards the advanced base mission. On November 12, 1908, the President signed Executive Order 969, specifying a revised mission set for the Marine Corps. This included garrisoning Navy yards and defending advanced naval bases, and it also included continuing to furnish expeditionary forces as required. But no longer included in the authorized missions was the ship's guard function. The Navy swiftly issued orders for the withdrawal of Marines from the crews of its ships. From the Marine Corps perspective, this was an existential threat. It occurred almost simultaneous with an argument being mounted by the Army to absorb the Marine Corps into its ranks. And all of the new missions assigned by the President to the Corps could be done by the infantry and coastal artillery. And with Marines removed from ships, most of what they were doing in Cuba, Panama, and the Philippines looked like Army work. Whenever Marines lacked clearly defined and unique roles, it left the Corps vulnerable to abolishment or absorption. Fortunately, in the crisis of 1908, the Corps benefited from the support of Congressman Thomas S. Butler, father of Major Smedley Butler, who was already emerging as a legend within the Corps for his combat leadership. Congressman Butler spearheaded an effort to bring the matter into open debate and hearings before Congress in January 1909, and to include language in a subsequent naval appropriations bill. This specified that 8% of the enlisted crew of all battleships and armored cruisers would be Marines, and forced the Navy to reinstate the Marine Guards. The Corps had narrowly outmaneuvered the naval reformers, but now, of course, faced increased criticism from them about neglecting the advanced base mission. The Corps had to begin taking that mission more seriously to both appease these critics and secure a unique strategic role for itself. So in 1910 and 1911, the Marine Corps began to devote more effort to the advanced base mission, establishing an advanced base school at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. And in 1913, the Corps had formed a full advanced base brigade with 2 complementary regiments, a fixed defense regiment and a mobile defense regiment. These were exercised with the fleet at Calabria in 1914. I believe that's what's depicted in the upper left-hand photograph there. In the lower right-hand photograph, you can see Marines of the fixed defense regiment establishing what looks to be a large caliber gun ashore as part of the defenses of an advanced base. But critically, when a crisis arose in Mexico shortly afterwards, these Marines from the advanced base force were quickly redeployed with the fleet to Veracruz, where they demonstrated real value as a flexible and ready response force. So this series of events occurred in a period which I regard as the birth of the modern Marine Corps for several reasons. First, this ended an era when the primary and sole justification for the existence of the Marine Corps was to provide Marine Guards for the vessels of the fleet. And it began an era of finding new roles to deliver unique strategic value to the nation. Secondly, in this time, the Corps was also fundamentally reshaping itself from a dispersed collection of shipboard and Navy Yard guard forces. After the advanced base force demonstrated the value of a standing ready operational force at Veracruz, it was redeployed to another intervention in Haiti. And over the next decade, the Marine Corps established standing battalions, regiments, and brigades. This is where the lineage of today's Marine Corps units begin. Another reason this period marks the birth of the modern Marine Corps is the Corps' response to the difficulty of recruiting men to serve in competition with the Army and the Navy. The Marines began to cultivate a distinct image to make it clear how a Marine was different from a soldier and a sailor, in effect emphasizing that Marines fulfilled both roles. The idea of a multi-purpose serviceman, one who could do the job of 2, carried an implication that a Marine was somehow better than a sailor and a soldier, a qualitative difference that was captured in its brand, Soldiers of the Sea Who Were First to Fight. Subsequently, the ability of the Corps to recruit more selectively and maintain high standards, and then deliver an impressive performance in France in World War I, became the foundation of the elite culture of the modern Marine Corps. What we see occurring starting in the second decade of the 20th century then is the Marine Corps starting to act as a true military service rather than merely an adjunct force for the Navy. The demands of the First World War gave the Corps an opportunity to demonstrate its value as a service to the nation once again. Commandant Major General George Burnett advocated for Marines' employment in a purely continental role as a supplement to Army forces in France. Now, this is a mission that the Department of the Navy had no obligation to do. And in the opinion of the U.S. Army, the Marines had no business doing this. But through some political maneuvering, they got a brigade to France to get their foot in the door. Ultimately, the Marine Corps provided 2 brigades as part of the American Expeditionary Force in France. But it was the performance of that 1st brigade, the 4th Marine Brigade, and the accompanying publicity it got that did much to reinforce Marine Corps claims that its men were qualitatively superior to those of the U.S. Navy. The U.S. Army was really the comparison made at the time, not really the Navy. Lesser known is that during this war, 3 brigades of Marines were also deployed to small wars duties in Haiti, Nicaragua, and Cuba, and also to secure the coastal oil fields between Texas and Mexico along that border. So when World War I came to an end, the small wars and expeditionary deployments in places like China consumed the bulk of the Marine Corps' deployable force. It is important to note, however, that throughout this entire period of changing operational demands, about a brigade's worth of Marines remained aboard ships in the traditional role in what were now referred to as Marine detachments, or MARDETs for short. Put another way, while the Marine Corps is faced with substantial operational demands that consume the advanced base force once again, the Corps never questioned the importance of its traditional mission, providing Marines to serve aboard the ships of the fleet. As the post-war Corps figured out its priorities, the urgency of maintaining an advanced base force was diminished, at least for a time, by the Washington Naval Arms Conference and de-escalating naval competition. With expeditionary commitments remaining high, in 1921, the Corps reorganized its standing regiments into two brigade-sized response forces, a West Coast Expeditionary Force and an East Coast Expeditionary Force. But the Corps was still thinking beyond those immediate mission demands to the strategic needs of the Navy. Lieutenant Colonel Earl Ellis's 1921 study of future war with Japan, that was known as Advanced Base Operations in Micronesia, concluded that in such a war, the Japanese could be expected to seize and defend many of the same bases the U.S. would need. To counter this, the U.S. fleet would require more than an advanced base force to occupy and defend uncontested bases. It needed an amphibious assault force to seize them. So efforts began to develop technologies and techniques for amphibious assault. Unfortunately, small wars commitments remained too high to focus manpower on this sort of effort until Franklin Delano Roosevelt's adoption of the Good Neighbor Initiative in U.S. foreign policy in 1933. This decreased U.S. interventions in Central and South American countries. And once these small war deployments came to an end, the Marine Corps had the manpower to begin building a standing amphibious force. An important milestone in this effort was the repurposing of the two expeditionary forces into the Fleet Marine Force in December 1933. This is represented on the chart by that gray zone suddenly transitioning into that huge red zone. This was more than just a rebranding or even a redesign of the expeditionary forces to reaffirm that the Marine Corps had roots in the naval service. This decision was a demonstration of great trust in the Navy. Essentially, it took the Commandant's authority as a service leader who could dispatch expeditionary forces for duty in response to national needs, and it made the Marine Corps into a force provider for the Navy. The Corps was now almost exclusively manning, training, and equipping Marines for the employment by the Chief of Naval Operations in support of fleet needs, either as its FMF or in the Marine Corps detachments of the growing fleet. Again, notice, however, that throughout this 40-year period of organizational turbulence for the Corps, there was a baseline mission to provide Marines to serve on the crews of capital ships. This was a substantial commitment that was never really questioned by the Corps, and it was an important tie between the services. The remainder of the 1930s and World War I is a familiar story, one of a very close partnership between the two naval services, with little record of more than temporary friction between them, as they innovated through both peace and war, guided by the Navy's strategic vision. The Central Pacific Campaign itself was a triumph of this partnership. Victory in the dawn of the nuclear age, however, changed everything. Many Americans began questioning the value of conventional forces when nuclear-armed bombers seemed to suggest a very different future for warfare. The defense unification efforts reshaped the national military establishment and forced the services to make some very hard choices. The Army, having gained its own proficiency in amphibious warfare in World War II, was once again eager to absorb the Marine Corps. The Navy's focus was on preserving its own air arm and developing nuclear capabilities. With many people questioning the survivability of amphibious task forces in the face of atomic weapons, it may have seemed a very logical choice for the Navy to compromise and preserve naval aviation, safeguarding that from the new Air Force by agreeing to give up the Marine Corps. To Marines, however, this was a betrayal. Discovering that, at least for a time, it was ultimately on its own, the Marine Corps leveraged its wartime record of accomplishments and the high esteem with which it was held by the American public to survive this crisis. Marine leaders maneuvered to secure the political influence necessary to preserve a unique role and a minimum force structure in law. So again, by thinking and acting like an independent service in its own self-interest, the Marine Corps survived this challenge. Then it began to craft a unique capability, one which was associated with the Navy, but not solely tied to it or dependent on the Navy's vision. Evolved from the World War II amphibious force and refined in Korea, the solution was the Scalable Marine Air Ground Task Force, or MAGTF. This was often, but not always, delivered from the sea, and it became the Marine Corps' major contribution to national defense. Throughout the Cold War, this multi-mission, flexible MAGTF structure, combined with a rapidly deployable expeditionary capability, has served the nation well. On the smaller size of the scalable MAGTF, for more than 6 decades now, the Marine Corps has worked with the Navy to keep Marine expeditionary units afloat in trouble spots around the world. These contribute to the Marine Corps' brand as a 911 force, and the amphibious ready groups have been employed in a variety of responsive missions far more frequently than the carrier strike groups. On the upper end of the MAGTF spectrum, which is actually on the top of this chart, the Marine Corps has developed Marine Expeditionary Forces, sometimes with a very large Marine Air Wing in support of multiple Marine divisions alongside the Army. And they've done this in several sustained major conflicts ashore, to include Vietnam, Desert Storm, Iraq, and Afghanistan. So this photograph of Marines in Desert Storm, there's nothing that screams Army more than heavy artillery engaged in a desert, right, or an environment far from the sea. But these are Marines serving alongside the Army because the MAGTF provides this capability. So throughout the Cold War, the Marine Corps continued to place importance on the Marine detachments. This was considered career-enhancing duty, and the detachment commander, usually a Marine captain, was treated as a department head among the ship's officers, with his functional peers being lieutenant commanders, or on larger ships, even commanders. Serving in the Mardet of a cruiser, battleship, or carrier was considered a special duty and an important tie to the soul of the Corps and its naval roots. So you probably didn't think I was going to put up a silly picture of Marines today, but I did that for a very important reason. These Marines were aboard the cruiser Oklahoma City in 1964, and they are participating in the crossing of the line ceremony, which will move them from being polywogs to shellbacks. A deep, deep naval tradition, right? Is this just people being silly? Well, the fact that Marines participated in these sorts of events, shoulder to shoulder with sailors, was very important for the Navy Marine Corps as a teamwork, because that's where lance corporals and seamen learned about each other and had that shared experience that they could refer to that didn't leave them as merely as strangers. This is the kind of thing that true partnerships are built upon, and that's why I think this really illustrates part of the real value of the Marine detachments for the Marine Corps. A major change to the demand signal, though, for these Mardets comes about through the Aegis combat system, which reconceptualized the role of the cruiser to one in which Marines really had no utility. Marine detachments continued to serve on the crews of submarine tenders, carriers, and battleships in the occasional periods when battleships were reactivated. And there they did fulfill some of their traditional roles, now protecting the nuclear resources aboard those vessels. But the number of ships that required these services tasks dwindled. So the shrinking Mardet requirement was eclipsed by that MAGTF as the Marine Corps' focus of effort. The emergence of the Marine Corps as a middleweight fighter for the Joint Force, capable of rapid deployment, overshadowed this Mardet mission, and even the Corps' legislative function as an amphibious assault force, capable of forcibly opening a hostile shore for a longer war to be fought by the other services. An era of jointness, emphasizing the interdependence and synergy of all the services working together, Marines have emerged as leaders in their own right. In World War II, it was unthinkable that even Lieutenant General Howland M. Smith, who rose to command of FMF would serve under anyone other than an admiral. And Marine Command of Army Forces on several occasions in that war proved very problematic. In the last 3 decades, however, reaching back from today, Marine generals have frequently served as Joint Force commanders responsible for entire theaters. We have a Marine general serving as a Joint Force commander right here today. And Marine generals have even served as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So perhaps it was this recognition that the Marine Corps contributes to the Joint Force as a service in its own right, and not just as part of the Navy, that helps explain why in 1998, Commandant General Charles Krulak felt comfortable standing down the final detachment aboard a ship of the U.S. Navy. The shipboard needs of the Navy had changed radically, and the Marine Corps no longer depended on this unique connection to justify its existence, despite it being a tie the Marine Corps maintained continuously for 200 years. And as I've shown you here so far, it was often at great cost in competition with other demands. Today, the only remnants of the original shipboard Marine Guards and Navy Yard barracks are the Marine Corps Security Force Regiment, which protects Navy nuclear storage facilities, and a single Navy Yard guard post outside the C&O's quarters on Washington Navy Yard. Combined with several other factors, this may seem to present a dismal state of affairs for Navy-Marine Corps relations. There has also been a tension between the services for decades about the number of amphibious ships needed to maintain marine lift requirements, and today the material state of readiness of the ships in the Gator Navy is a real challenge for both services. Before we fault the Navy, however, for somehow neglecting this capability, we should recognize that during the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, some of these amphibs went years without a single Marine aboard. And there are also many Marines who have served a whole career in the Corps through this era without ever spending time aboard a ship, because these two services were focused on very different problem sets. Fortunately, even the latent connections that remained during the first 2 decades of this century have primed the Navy and Marine Corps team to face a very different threat today. Competition with expansionist China and its growing naval power present real challenges for the U.S. to maintain regional stability. This demands increased cooperation between the Navy and the Marine Corps. Commandant General David Berger recognized this in 2019 and began a transformation of the Marine Corps called Force Design. Force Design is explicitly reshaping the Corps to provide littoral combat forces armed with advanced systems ready to deny the use of the sea to deter adversaries, which is an inherently naval mission. And quick synopsis here, those capabilities, such as large numbers of traditional artillery and tanks, are the things that made the Marine Corps look like a second army a little bit, are the things that have been given up, along with infantry, to recraft forces that are meant to go ashore in small units with radars, drones, anti-drone systems, anti-ship missiles, things like that, that can help the Navy in the littoral regions that lead to the blue water fight. So this is an enormous change for the Marine Corps. And the progress that's been made thus far on this program is a product of the Corps' willingness to make itself a supporting partner of the fleet once again, and of the historic ties between the Navy and Marine Corps. These begin with a mutual affinity that comes from our shared history, builds upon mutual awareness and understanding, and ultimately translates into collaboration, cooperation, unity of effort, and lethal synergy. If the Navy needs a partner who can operate ashore and help it fight at sea, it can accomplish much more with its Marine Corps than it ever could with the Army. One need only look at past attempts to build inter-service cooperation, such as Army Air Force's Air-Land Battle Doctrine of the 1980s, or the Navy Air Force Air-Sea Battle Vision of the 2000s. These initiatives faded significantly before too long, showing that even with the best intentions and a great idea, you can only get so far with fundamentally dissimilar services. The history of the U.S. Navy and Marine Corps, as I have described it here today, shows that when the threat has been the greatest, cooperation between our naval service has been the tightest. And the Navy and Marine Corps have accomplished most as a team. This shared history shows that we have a solid foundation to start from when we look to the future in the service of our nation. Thank you.
All right, so we'll start with question and answer. Again, please wait till you have a microphone in your hand so that this gets broadcast on the live stream. Who's first? Renee?
Back to the funny slide you had with the guys crossing the line. You said they were going from Polywall, is it, to Shellbacks?
Correct me if I'm wrong, ma'am. I thought that's what the ceremony does when they're recognized by King Neptune for crossing the equator.
That's right, that's the one that I.
Yes.
And then just one more question. You've got your Nemesis, then you've got your Iron Dome, and then you've got your multiple launch rocket system. Are they all kind of similar, or how's that go?
Not all of those systems are currently being pursued by the Navy and Marine Corps, but know that there is a complementary arrangement of different weapon systems that work together to fill gaps and provide both the ability to sense threats and also address those threats with fires, and ideally with redundancy. But when the time comes to face this threat in the future, we're going to be dealing with a very capable, thinking and adapting adversary, and so it'll be absolutely critical for us as a team to work together and learn from our experience and grow in the heat of combat. And that's what the solid foundation really gets us. Are there any other questions I can answer?
I guess you talked about where you were stationed. Where were you when you retired, and where were some of the places that you were stationed?
Most of my career was as an F-18 backseater and two-seat F-18s captain. So my operational tours, I was based out of Beaufort, South Carolina, the air station down there. I did have an opportunity to serve as a forward air controller and a company commander within 2nd Light Armored Reconnaissance Battalion in Camp Lejeune. That was one of my favorite tours. Got to do a lot of really cool things with jets, but getting a chance to lead Marines in the field was an awesome responsibility that I truly will always treasure. You were asking about the end of my career. I finished up as an instructor at the Command and Staff College in Quantico, Virginia. By that point, I had to visualize that education was where I wanted to make my second career. And I have been honored with the chance to come lead History Division as a Marine who is a historian. And it is a great honor to be a part of that team, preserving and promoting our history.
Did you ever fly out of Cherry Point?
Yes, sir, many occasions. Why do you ask?
Well, I was stationed in Moorhead City,
Okay.
and I had a 40-footer, and every time a plane was having problems landing, we had to get underway and go to the Neuse River and stand by. And none of them ever crashed. But I must have did that 20 times.
Well, I want to thank you publicly for that, sir. We were talking beforehand. For those who don't know, the captain served in the Coast Guard for a career and then some. And we were just actually talking beforehand. My theory is that of all the armed forces, the two that are closest together in terms of their spirit are actually the Marine Corps and the Coast Guard. We're small, we don't have a lot of money, and what I see of Coasties is that they are laser focused on their mission, and they'll do what it takes. And I've been very impressed with every Coastie I've served with. So, sir, thank you for your service, and thank you to the U.S. Coast Guard.
Thank you.
Somebody else?
Thank you for your presentation. Do you have a particular time period that you focus on and you're most interested in?
Yes, sir. Thank you for that question. At various points in my growth as a historian, I've focused on different eras. That kind of late 19th century is one that I have a lot of fondness for, which is one of the reasons why I was really excited to be here and learn about the Marines' history here at Portsmouth. But most of my scholarship is focused on the development of ideas for war fighting in after the Vietnam War. It was a period of great challenge for the military services to figure out how did they react to that experience and how do they adapt to the Cold War. And my focus is really on the ideas of a gentleman named Colonel John Boyd and how the Marine Corps adopted some of his ideas, incorporated those with a large pool of other things to come up with a new approach to warfighting, which we call maneuver warfare. And it is the basis of the Marine Corps doctrine today. And I think what's so important about that is it isn't just that it talks about a different technique for fighting. The basis of warfighting is an entirely different way of understanding warfare. Okay? Part of the Marines' ethos is that while technology is important and can be decisive, we can never forget the human element of war. And technology will never eliminate all the fog and friction that will exist, no matter how good your system is. And what we need is that people who understand the inherent chaos and unpredictability and the adaptation needed, instant adaptation needed to succeed in warfare to out-adapt your enemies. That's what our doctrine keeps us focused on. And I think it's very well represented in our ethos. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir.
Great. And I'd be happy to talk about any of these things more, certainly afterwards. Sir?
You went to the Naval Academy?
I did.
Here. My question is, when did Marines start coming out of the Naval Academy as a Department of the Navy initiative, perhaps? But was it even that they were there at the Navy Yard in the early stages of Navy officer education?
Great question. There's a really interesting story here. I actually cut it for time, so I appreciate you being a great straight man for this. Marines did not start attending the U.S. Naval Academy. It's approximately 1871. I should probably know the exact date. But there was a situation where the Navy was producing more midshipmen than it needed. And in the 1870s, a lot of them were just being let go to civilian service unless they were at the top of their class. Simultaneously, all Marine Corps officers had pretty much been political appointees. And there was a legend at this time that for Marine officers, the phrase USMC stood for Useless Sons Made Comfortable. So the Marine Corps was in search of an opportunity to bring in somebody who'd been to a professional school like West Point. So the solution was, approximately 1871, they began drawing graduates of the Naval Academy to become Marine officers. The next 50 Marine officers all came from that same promotion or commissioning source. So that includes people like I mentioned here today, Barnett, Lejeune, who I didn't mention, Neville, many of the commandants that served throughout the 1910s, 20s, and 30s were Naval Academy graduates. It is my theory that these are known as the Golden 50 because they brought in this kind of professional element to the Marine Corps, really helped it stay tied to the Navy as a service when it kind of went off chasing a small wars mission or a number of other opportunities that were out there. So that is a relationship that began and has been maintained to this day. I think when I graduated in 1992, up to 1/6 of the fleet could be commissioned into the Marine Corps. In more recent times, that number has been enlarged. I believe it's 25% now. So again, we talk about the crossing of the line ceremony being where real partnerships and mutual understanding comes from. Me getting together with my classmates today who all had accomplished careers in the Navy and knowing that we started from that same foundation, even if I never knew them when we served at the academy together, like instant trust comes from shared experience. Long answer to your question, but I'm sure you all appreciate it and build that into the already long lecture. All right, any more questions?
My image of the Marines is they're the toughest guys in the military. Is that a true image, or is that the way they want to be conceived?
Yes.
How do they come about? How does that image come about?
Oh, as the toughest? Do you remember when I was talking about the whole Soldiers of the Sea thing? We've got to somehow convince people that they want to join us because it's obvious what a Navy is for and an Army is for. So the Marine Corps brought in professional recruiters and a professional advertising agency to help it craft that story in the 1910s. And then frankly, the Marine Corps has always benefited when it's been compared with the Army by the fact that the Army is so much larger. So when the Army has to grow, I think it's 20 times its pre-war size for World War I, the Marine Corps only grows by something like, I think it's 5 or 6 times its pre-war size. That allows it to be more selective. The Marine Corps did a great job, but when it sent that first brigade to France, building a pickup team of the best leaders it could find anywhere, putting them together in Quantico, giving them some recruits, and putting them through a rigorous training process before they went. And I really think it was that experience in France where they were able to demonstrate, and I don't mean any disrespect towards any Army veterans here, but to demonstrate and show the public through publicity efforts that they were something special that led to what I would call this kind of elite cycle. You say you're better, so you attract higher quality candidates, you put them through a tougher screening process, you hold them to higher standards, they perform better, and now you have a claim to be better. Now, I very much am thankful for our joint partners and my many friends in the Army, but historically, this is the Marine Corps story. Thank you very much.
Callahan, we have a gift for you. You showed Building M32. I want to thank Marcus Robbins, who's the command historian for the Norfolk Naval Shipyard, who put this together from his own collection,
Amazing.
Building M32.
It's a photograph of the Marine barracks, the Marines of the barracks there in 1978, which is when the Sea School was still there. I will treasure this and always remind me of coming to do this today.
We did not plan that. And then challenge coin for the 250th birthday of the Norfolk Naval Shipyard.
Thank you very much.
very much.
Don't go anywhere, because I too brought something. This year, the National Museum of the Marine Corps put together this, they're putting together a special exhibit of items from throughout Marine Corps history, and they've packaged it here in this book that tells about the exhibit and some of these kind of featured artifacts and pieces of artwork that exist in our museum up in Quantico, Virginia. I share this with you so you can learn more about Marines by placing this in the museum library. But certainly, we'd love to host a visit anytime you want to come up to see us in Quantico, Virginia. We'd be most honored.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much, Dr. Callahan, General Williams. I want to share a story of what you were saying about becoming more competitive in the Marine Corps. The best man when Jeannie and I got married was a Marine Colonel, female Marine Colonel, graduate class of 92. I don't know if you knew Jennifer Carter.
Sure did.
Okay. From the Naval Academy. Jennifer relates the story to me that in 1992, when you went to selection day, probably one of the least wanted positions, at least not as competitive back in 92, was Marine Corps. When I finished sponsoring midshipmen in the mid-2000s, everybody wanted to go Marine or Flight. Those were the first two things that got selected, and everything else was the afterthought. So it has changed, and it's a testament to what y'all do. Thank you very much for your service. So I want to thank you all for being here today. I just once again want to remind you about our next two events, our next two speaker series. They are, again, October 11th, 250 years of U.S. medicine. Our speaker will be Andrei Zlopochinsky, who is with the U.S. Bureau of Medicine and Surgery. And then a couple of weeks later, on November 1st, Marcus Robbins will be here speaking on the 250 years of the shipyard service to the Navy. I also want to alert everybody who has heard me say time and time again how we were getting ready to get our wonderful oral history project up and running on our website. For those of you who don't know, we started about 4 years ago, 3.5 years ago, collecting oral histories from current and former or retired Norfolk Naval Shipyard workers. And they are now up on our website, the first 8 interviews. Just feel free to go to Friends of Portsmouth or friendsofpnsm.org. And on there you will find the first 8 of the interviews. We have 10 or 11 more in the can, as they like to say at the TV production studios over at IC Norcom, who's doing all this work. And we expect those to be up by the end of summer. We've got a conference call with the instructor there who's doing the editing so that we can get these up on Monday. So we are going to get those up. Glad to have those up. And then I just want to do a plug for our 2 big events coming up in September. The Portsmouth Paddle Battle, which is our major fundraiser. I'm sure most of you are familiar with it. That's the kayak and SUP racing on the Elizabeth River. It's Saturday after Labor Day, and we start the races at 10 o'clock. The races will be over at noon, and then after that, our first inaugural, we finally got the city to approve it, Junior Paddle Battle. We're offering free kayak lessons to Portsmouth youth, ages 8 to 14. We're looking for volunteers if you know how to paddle or if you just have patience with kids. Our volunteer website will be up by Monday or Tuesday. Feel free to sign up. We need people to get in tandem kayaks and help the kids paddle. We need people to help them teach them how to paddle on land before we put them in the water. So those two things keep in mind as volunteer opportunities. We really appreciate it. So with that, thank you all very much for coming. Have a great day.